frankly, I'm giving a talk. I am going to tell you about Flask, which is a simple web framework written in Python. And it's a web framework that I like because I think it's simple and Pythonic. And as someone who doesn't really do that much web dev, I appreciate it as a nice, simple way to make websites. I can recommend it to people who are not necessarily web devs or want to really get into web dev, but just want to like throw up a quick page, have it work. So I used to work in web dev a bunch of times, and mostly just adding things to existing systems, existing frameworks. But about a couple of years ago, for the first time, I had an opportunity to make a little web app from start to end, all of the layers. So I had the opportunity to actually select a web framework that I preferred for the first time. So I selected Flask. What is Flask? It's a simple web framework. It is similar to projects like web.py or Bottle. It's essentially the same kind of syntax. I've discovered web.py many years ago, and when I wanted to do something like that again, I discovered that it was kind of obsolete. Nobody used it anymore. Later, there was another project called Bottle, but that has now been superseded by Flask, and people still seem to be using Flask, so I guess it's still a good idea. Flask is built on top of, it incorporates other projects and is built on top of them. It uses Werkzeug for the WSGI layer. That's how you get it to talk to Apache when you get there, but you don't need to worry about that at the start. And it uses Ginger 2 for templating, but you can also use it with Genshi or other things. It just uses Ginger 2 by default, and I saw no reason not to use that. Why Flask? It has a very clean syntax. It has relatively little boilerplate, and it's pretty easy to set up. It comes with a built-in little demo web server. You probably wouldn't want to run your entire site on it, but it's really great to just run the file, have the site pop up, and you can test it without messing around. It's got a debug mode, so it is very helpful when you're developing to have it print out what is actually going on if something goes wrong. So this is Hello World in Flask. Now just some basic concepts about writing a website in a language like Python. If you have a static website full of HTML pages, every page you go to is an actual page. It's a file on in some kind of tree of files, and what you request is exactly what you get from the tree. And to some extent, PHP apps, at least at the start, kind of followed the same model. So instead of an HTML page, you have a PHP page, which corresponds to every HTML page, and that gives you an HTML page. If you want to write an app, if you want to write a web app in Python, you kind of have to move away from that very literal model. And what you actually write in a framework like this is just a mapping. You have a mapping of paths that you would request on your web server, and then an application will somehow produce something for that path, but there isn't necessarily actually any file anywhere or any actual file system tree. This is all just one file. So this is a simple example of how Flask works. There's a bunch of setup stuff over here, import stuff, you create an app, and this is how you define your mappings. So you have a function which returns something. Pretend that this is HTML code. It isn't actually, but it'll display in a browser and show you something. And we want this to display when the user goes to the root of your web application. So you use this decorator called app.root, which essentially maps this path to this function with this output. And then this over here will start the little demo web server and show you how this works. So I have some examples that I prepared earlier. So that file contains basically this. I deliberately left red out of these slides because I wasn't sure if we were going to have any. Now if I can see where my mouse is. Where's my mouse? Where's my... Okay, here it is, right. Okay, and so that web server told us what port it was running on our local machine, and we go to this port and it should say hello world, which you can't see because it's scrolled off the screen. But yeah, there it is. Okay.
British versions.
Where is it on the... Why can't I find where the... Oh, here we go. Right. So that's not a very useful app, and also it's not very useful because it's not actually producing HTML. and that is not something to be encouraged. So something, a lot of people do in PHP is just intersperse like HTML in their file with PHP code, and then it doesn't look nice. So a nicer way of doing this sort of thing is to use a template. So you have what is essentially almost like a static HTML page, but possibly broken up into little pieces, and then you use some kind of dynamic stuff to assemble your page out of these bits. And Ginger 2 is one of these engines. Gentry is also quite popular, and we can use a simple template to actually make a proper HTML page which says hello world. So this is over here, this simple style sheet. This is a very, very minimal HTML page, but I am told this is actually a proper HTML page. You can, obviously, you want to style your page with a style sheet, and this is so any static pages that you actually have in your application go in a particular directory, and then you use some special dynamic stuff for actually loading stuff from that directory so you can find it. And if we have a look at this, we can run our nice new example. And now, if we reload this, here we go. Here's our proper HTML page. You can view source, it'll be HTML. So what is next? So far, this is all pretty static. But you can add variable parts to your application, obviously. So you can have this little function print a variable message that you submit to the app instead of just hello world. So here we're mapping both of these routes to this application, and we are setting a default parameter for message. So if message exists, it'll get filled in here. If it doesn't exist, we're just going to use the default. And we're going to render it using the same template. So now, if we just go there with no parameters, it does the same thing. But we can also type something in there. Whoops. Did I forget to run it? I forgot to run it. Sorry. That is example 3. There we go. There. So we put in a variable. Do we know what post and get parameters are? Anyone? No. Okay, so that's how you send information to a web server. If you fill in a form and it sends some stuff, it generally uses post. If you see in your URL question mark and then blah equals whatever, and those are get parameters. So you don't actually have to specify anything if you just want to use get, because that's on by default. But here, as an example, you can specify that you would also like this URL to use post parameters. So now we're going to pass in the message in the actual request parameters.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Where did you get request from?
Request is, I believe it's something you import from Flask at the top of your file. In fact, we can have a look. I think this is example 4. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that they're in the bar that you can't quite see because it's running into the black. You are in fact importing a request from Flask, so it's a thing you import from Flask. So now can we do that with that and message equals hello, which I've already done before, and there we go. So we've achieved essentially the same thing, but using request parameters.
I'm going to do a curl now and post it for us.
Okay, so something which is important to remember when you're writing web apps is that what you don't get for free is persistence, because when you write a normal desktop application, there's a process, it runs for one user, it's all very linear, maybe you have an event loop, but it's all like one process, all the data hangs around, you don't have to do anything, you just obviously get persistence because it's there. But web apps don't work like that because they're built on top of web pages, which were really designed for this purpose, but we've done an amazing job of mutating them into this thing that can do anything. So you ask a web server for a page, and gives you one, and then sometime later you ask it for a page again, gives you one, but it doesn't know that those are both your pages, that there's something going on there. There are lots of users requesting pages, so your app needs to be able to identify you and somehow get your persistent data and your history and where you are in the app. So unfortunately, you have to do that yourself. So something you can do is store some data in browser cookies. So there's some session stuff. There's session stuff built into Flask, and it's relatively simple. So the session is exposed as something which looks like a dictionary, but as we all heard today, just because something is a dictionary, looks like a dictionary, doesn't mean it's actually a dictionary. So this is actually saving stuff to like a cookie. So it's serializing things, saving to a cookie. I'm pretty sure the serialization happens by default, I think. It just does it for you in the background. But this does mean that you can't take an enormous object and just put it in there, because that's not going to work, because you only have 4K to work with, I think. So this is how you can get something from the session, and so now our default route is going to either print hello world or whatever message was saved in the session. But we have to put a message in the session, or it'll never be anything other than hello world. So we're going to make another route with another little function which puts the message that we have specified in the session, and this is a key which is used for encrypting the sessions so that they can't be tampered with. So, just to see what this looks like. Also, it would help to actually run this. So now if we go to the main page, it prints, because I saved that earlier. So currently that's what's in my session. If we want to change that message, we go to, what did I say it was? No, that's I've forgotten my own slides. It's unfortunate. Right. What did I say? / message, okay. So now, if we put something else in here, like and then if we go to the main page again, it will read this from our session, and it'll stay like that forever until we change it to something else. So yeah, there's a size limit of 4K, so don't pickle your entire state of your application and put it in there, because it's not going to work, and it will not be obvious why it doesn't work, because apparently this is so obvious they don't even give you an error message that tells you you're being an idiot. So there are various ways of, obviously the data that you want to persist is unlikely to actually fit within 4K, so there are various ways to work around this. Some people have effectively server-side sessions, so they pickle all the data, they put it somewhere like a database or something, and then all they put in your cookie is some kind of ID, and then it goes fetches it. And some people swear by this, some people think it's terrible, but it's a thing you can do. But what you can also do is sometimes you can kind of recreate all your objects and stuff you're working with from a relatively minimal set of information. I ended up building my application on top of a database, so I didn't actually need to worry that much about this because everything was sort of stored there already. Okay, so how do you actually make this app do stuff? How do you make it do things when the user clicks on things? So obviously a lot of web app stuff happens in JavaScript. Traditionally this is, local user-side scripting, which has now pretty much become JavaScript. You can modify bits of the page without ever talking to a server because all the information is there, and you can use what is already on the user's computer, and that's relatively fast. Traditionally, you use things like forms to submit data to the server. except old school websites, you would fill in a form and click a button, it would post everything and regenerate a whole web page with new information on it. But now we use something, most web apps that are modern use something called Ajax, which is a fancy way for JavaScript that talks to your server. The idea is that you have some stuff that can happen locally, and some of the JavaScript that's on the page can talk to the server to request a small fragment of information and changes something on your page dynamically, and you don't have to keep reloading the whole page. It's relatively fast, relatively responsive. So you can do Ajax in Flask. This is a very simple example. We're going to scramble the message when the user clicks on a button. So you need essentially three parts for this. You need the actual thing in the template, which puts the elements there that things are going to happen to. You need your JavaScript for doing stuff on the client side, and you need server-side handling for what the JavaScript is going to ask for. So we're going to use jQuery for this. If you don't know anything about JavaScript and you've never used it before and you want to do some simple JavaScript stuff, I highly recommend that you look at a high-level library like jQuery, because it may save you a lot of pain, even if it may seem like overkill. jQuery gives you a sort of CSS-like interface to add JavaScript to your page. You kind of use selectors, and then you say, I want elements with this class to have this function and stuff like that. It's a lot nicer in many cases than fiddling around with low-level JavaScript. So here we're just going to load jQuery from our static directory, and we're going to load our custom JavaScript. And yeah, this just saves a script root variable which will be important in our JavaScript later. And the important thing here is that we're making an element which is the ID scramble, and this is what the user is going to click on to scramble the message. Also elsewhere on this page is the actual message which we have seen earlier, and this is therefore omitted. So this is the JavaScript. It's not very pretty. It has a fair bit of boilerplate, but essentially what this does is it takes the element with ID scramble, and when you click on that element, it executes a function which gets the element called message and gets the text from that element and sends it to this path in your application, and then gets some JSON back, and it's some JSON data, and the data has the scrambled message inside it, and then it replaces the text in that message with what you just got back. If you exclude the boilerplate, that's basically what it says. And then this is the very pretty Python backend with very few brackets. So this is relatively simple. So now you make a route in your app for this scramble action, and you know that you're going to get a message in the argument, so you get that message, then you make it into a list, and you shuffle it, and you put it back into a string, and then you send it back. JSONify is a built-in thing in Flask for making JSON objects out of, I think, like simple list of Python things. Okay, and now I will show you how this all works. So there's the element with the message, and there's the element with the button, which you can now click on, and it scrambled it. And scrambles it, and the only thing it replaces is this little bit over here, and doesn't do anything else with the rest of the page, and doesn't reload. The magic of Ajax. So this was obviously a very toy example. If you want more information, you can go to flask.puku.org. You can go to the Puku channel and Freenode. Everyone who works on Flask is very nice and answers your questions, is very nice. If you remember Armin Ronacher, who gave the keynote from last year's PyCon, he works on this stuff, so it's like cool stuff. And now I will show you a real example, which is what I actually used this for most recently. Just need to find it. So what I actually use this for is a curriculum planning tool, which was commissioned by, I think, the Faculty of Science. Faculty was someone told me to do it. Yeah, it's complicated. And now I will see if I can actually remember all the parameters. So this is it's a relatively small app. All the Flask stuff is essentially in one page called pages, or one file called pages.py. And it's built on top of a database. I'm using SQLite, so I have to specify this as a parameter. Yay. That's even in the same place. So the point of this tool, okay, it's not what it normally looks like. I think I just had a CSS file called the same thing inconveniently. Okay, this would be a lot prettier if you could see the two things side by side, but I think the screen is unfortunately too narrow for that. But normally they're next to each other. So the idea is that you use this tool for planning an undergraduate curriculum for a particular person. So you can select majors that you want them to have in your curriculum, like computer science. And it gets filled in on this little timetable in the appropriate time slot. And it's both lectures and practicals. And you can add another major like chemistry. Fastest, and then when you have things clashing, you can move them to different days so that they don't clash anymore. And there are all kinds of rules about how many credits you have to have by minimum for the course to meet the degree requirements, how many you're allowed to have within a year so you don't exceed the maximum. And over here it gives you like messages saying that you don't have enough credits, giving you information which isn't handled by this, and telling you about recommended requisites and stuff. And here it tells you what courses you currently have. It just take them away both over here and over there, and it shows you a kind of visual representation of what's going on. Yeah, so this was all done entirely in Flask with a SQL object backend and a bit of jQuery on top to make everything jiggle around and work. So you can really use Flask for real things, and it's useful. And it was pretty easy to learn. I didn't really, apart from the hilarious session misadventure, I didn't really encounter any major blockages when working with this web framework. So if you're looking for a very simple thing that you want to learn really quickly and make a nice website in, I can recommend Flask. And that is my talk.
Question time. Who's going to start us off? If you go, Andre.
Yes. Yes. Yes, that'll be cool. Except I'm not sure if debug is turned on, and I'm not sure if I can actually break this to give you an exception. But yeah, okay. Let's see that, because I think default is actually on by default. So let us go and where's my mouse? Yeah. Actually, where am I going? I don't need the slides. So let's cancel that. Where are we? There we go. I guess we'll see if debug is on. And now, here we go. It's running. Now we'll go here. Okay, no, that was. I think debug isn't on. Wait, do you just say debug equals true? I think you do. In app.run. So you put debug, yeah, in there. Is it all caps or small letters? Boom, there we go. And gives you a lovely stack trace and tells you exactly where you screwed up.
You can even click in there.
Yeah. Can you? Sweet. Yeah. Wow, you can. Here we go.
Get it right. If you hit the tab.
Nice. That. Cool. There you go. So this is very useful for debugging.
Another one at the back, yeah.
I think that depends on how big your application is. So even the curriculum planner is a very small application. It's only really one page and like a couple of commands that do Ajax-y stuff. So there's no real reason to split that up into files. And it's generally a good idea to try and separate different layers of your code as much as possible. So I have the kind of my model stuff is kind of intertwined with my database layer because SQL object kind of works like that. It abstracts away database stuff into your objects. That's all that model stuff is separate from the Flask stuff, which works the web app. Essentially, it calls out to an object, and sometimes there's a kind of an API on the object which is called from the Flask layer, but I don't put it all in like one giant file. Obviously, if you have like a more complicated web app with like multiple pages and stuff, I think it's a good idea to split things up logically, but not into overly small pieces just for the sake of splitting it up too much. Like some people put like a class per file, that's a bit much. But you kind of have to use your own judgment for like that kind of stuff.
Any more questions?
Is there any authentication stuff built into it?
Yes, I think. I mean, there's authentication stuff you can do, which I kind of briefly looked into. I'm not sure to what extent there's like stuff built in, but it's relatively, there are a lot of recipes and kind of code examples on the Flask webpage which show you how to do like various kinds of things, and I'm pretty sure they have authentication examples there as well. So I think it's relatively easy to do. Yeah.
There's a bunch of extensions. Anybody else? No?
Yes, can you post two examples somewhere? Can you post two examples somewhere?
Yes. This talk is up somewhere, but I'll put it up properly, like somewhere where people can look at it. Okay.
Okay, if there's no more, I think we're good. We've got 5 minutes to go. Thank you, Adriana.